Okay, so we've had zombies retconned into minority oppression, slashers feign the fanbase suppression, yet really exposing horror regression, and vampires repurposed into LGBT repression. Come on, ghost stories, pull out a win, please. They can't possibly politicize dead spirits, can they? Can they?
The one monster that's in every culture, no matter how sophisticated or primitive, all around the world, and that's ghost.
Do you believe in ghosts?
Isn't it interesting to consider that other countries, various cultures, different religions, all have a common thread of wandering spirits? As much as horror is a universal language, it is thought-provoking that anywhere in the world you may visit, that you have one monster that everyone recognizes and unanimously fears.
Vampires, werewolves, zombies, people don't really believe that stuff is real, but ghosts?
Meanwhile, at the Legion of Doom.
28 Days Later is a perfect horror movie because it's based on a premise you can completely believe. But I can't imagine what it's like to have a plague spread like wildfire because it's just too close to the headlines of today's news. It could happen.
You stupid idiots!
But until the 1980s, spirits were rarely seen on screen. And if they were rarely convincing. That all changed with Poltergeist.
They're here.
Poltergeist is a haunted house movie that took place in the suburbs, that was in the least scary place possible.
I'm out of here.
Bye, honey.
The family lives in San Fernando Valley that gets plagued by spirits because the area where they live was built on a graveyard that is getting back at them.
Don't worry about it. After all, it's not ancient tribal burial ground. It's just people.
This was the first family horror movie I remember seeing. Its mixture of ghostly effects and physical threats to the family made for a lethal combination and is what really stood out to me. It wasn't until years later that I recognized it as the unholy trinity of ghost stories, along with Amityville and The Shining.
You took the director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Tobe Hooper, and you took Steven Spielberg, the director of Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark. That was the biggest horror event.
Well, look at the big names on display. That level of synergy, when you have two legends in their prime, their joining forces could have only generated yet another classic from filmmakers that had already earned their bones creating iconic cinema.
Your dog is alive and in this house.
Dear God, that lady's raspy voice still freaks me out. As repetitive as shows like Scariest Places on Earth were, her hoarse commentary was always creepier than any signs of life beyond death shown on that program.
The good fortune of Poltergeist was that it did have the budget to allow the filmmakers to express their imagination on film.
A spirit coming down the stairs for the first time. Feeling of the body and the arms coming up.
Yeah.
Just when you begin to see the fingers, it goes whoosh, breaks up like blowing a smoke ring apart in the air.
Anything that Toby and Steven could think of that belonged in the movie was in the movie. But there's no CGI in Poltergeist.
And then there's the scene with the tree.
Oh, yeah. Boy, that tree. Stephen had this image, because when he was a kid, there was a tree outside his bedroom window that scared the crap out of him. And so that tree had to be there. It was a rubber tree.
For me, the tree coming alive was very vivid and visceral, and so every time I sort of looked out the window and the moonlight was just so, I would constantly picture that tree.
We did a take. I went to Craig and I said, hey, Craig, I says, you don't need to make them smell like this. They smelled. And he says, well, they're real.
Yeah, I can't imagine how it came about that both cast and film were really haunted. It's astonishing to believe that they got away with using real cadavers to simulate corpses. Imagine the bodies were asked on the red carpet, hey, what did you do to prepare for this role? I walked into open traffic.
The spirit of Poltergeist lives on in the Insidious series, which shows us an afterlife filled with restless souls.
Yeah, no. Insidious just wishes it was the modern Poltergeist. It speaks to so little of the confidence people have in these modern films that they have to attach it to something with brand name recognition because their own name doesn't carry any weight or value.
James Wan's film Insidious is a ghost story for the 21st century. It delivers shocks, suspense, and genuine emotion to audiences that may think they've seen it all.
This is how you die. Not today, it isn't. Come on, bitch.
So, Betty White over there, who's well into her 70s, headbutts a ghost and tosses it across a room. What, no wrestling finishing maneuver? I mean, that's the only way to guarantee the 3 count, right? That tough guy routine immediately extinguishes any tension when your protagonist can easily subdue the threat and isn't even scared of their surroundings. Oh, and that little bring it on gesture? That's cute. I suppose it's worth it, though, to make your senior citizen look like a badass. Can you tell the B in B movies stands for Blumhouse?
There's a human need to answer that question of life after death, and I think ghost films feed into that.
No kidding, Einstein. It literally depicts life after death.
2 haunted house movies loom above the rest. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining and Robert Wise's The Haunting.
Usually ghost stories work when it's about what you don't see.
The dead are not quiet in Hill House.
The Haunting is about a group of people who are brought together in this old dark house to try to find out what's at the root of supernatural spirits.
The house is calling you.
I'm thrilled that they mentioned 1960s The Haunting. You might think, meh, black and white movie, and I said the same thing. But that is such a great paranoia-fueled ghost film, I'm glad I gave it a watch. As much as the phrase, what you don't see is what's scary, can get old, its execution never does, and films like The Haunting prove why.
The first movie that terrified me to the point where I could barely look at it was The Haunting. I was probably 11 years old, and you never really see anything until that woman
But that
comes
door's
out.
pounding.
Okay, settle down, Spaz.
Of course, Stephen King did grow up. And 17 years later, his second novel, The Shining, was adapted for the screen by the legendary director Stanley Kubrick.
I love how they transition between The Haunting and a talent who went on to create a classic of his own instead of referencing or ripping off the former.
Like The Haunting, The Shining is about a bad place and the terrible effect it has on the people who stay there. Jack Nicholson plays Jack Torrance, an unstable writer who takes the job of winter caretaker at the secluded Overlook Hotel.
Something about this hotel that just wants the people who go there to murder each other.
Yikes. Am I the only one getting pedo vibes from this guy? He looks like the recruiter from Deadpool.
Mr. Wilson, how can I help you, besides luring children into a panel van?
But Kubrick made many changes to King's story that didn't sit well with its author.
I can enjoy it on the same level that you could enjoy a beautifully restored Cadillac without a motor in it. You know?
To this day, King will not let go of the changes that Stanley Kubrick made to The Shining. I love it. The world over recognizes this movie as a celebrated landmark film, except for its author.
So much of the movie is from the perspective of whatever character you're with. So for Danny, it's one thing. For Jack Nicholson's character, it's this sort of unseen menace that sort of takes him over. And Shelley Duvall says she's a ghost story freak. And it's like, so in her mind, the horror takes on this cheesier form. And it's like, oh, it's just everybody, it's all from subjective perspective, which just makes it all the creepier.
I honestly never considered the POV, how each character views the ghosts differently. It just goes to show that with repeated watching, a film like this reveals just a little more than you noticed the first time around.
The Shining featured a boy who could see the malevolent spirits of the dead. 2 decades later, The Sixth Sense told the story of another haunted child. This time, by ghosts who were desperate for help.
My porridge is too hot! I ordered it just right! And now we slip back into the overrated territory. I didn't think this movie was any great shakes when I saw it, and after its inflated reaction, let alone the years of embellishment, I think even less of it.
I did not see the twist coming in that film.
No.
I was so scared.
By the way, anybody that tells you they guessed it, they're so
Nobody
full
guessed
of
it.
I so did.
Nobody guessed it. But that's the genius.
No,
but you know what?
good. I was gonna say.
Sure, because it's not like savvy audiences didn't pick up on the clues that the film itself gives, which became Shyamalan's trademark. But yeah, we gotta keep up the pretense that this is an undeniable classic. We horror fans have our standards, right? Right? We're obligated to maintain the facade of this film's integrity long after the creator's credibility has since been debunked.
Perhaps the greatest ghost mystery movie of all time is The Changeling.
I have heard that The Changeling is a great movie. I've never seen it. I've watched the film, I've never seen this milestone motion picture that people prattle on about.
And he walks in through the front door.
I'm sorry. I can't watch the ball drop scene of The Changeling without thinking of the Scary Movie 2 parody.
But Del Toro's ultimate ghost movie is 2015's Crimson Peak.
When the time comes, beware of Crimson Peak.
Oh, now it's a ghost story. I remember hearing how it was a gothic romance, not a horror film. Or was that the spin to excuse its disappointing box office?
Have you heard about this videotape that kills you when you watch it?
What kind of tape?
A tape. A regular tape. The Ring is about a videotape. And if you watch it within 7 days, you die.
Do you mean of boredom? This movie, along with Blair Witch Project, has the distinction of being the only horror movies that ever put me to sleep while watching them.
The US version of The Ring grossed $249 million, ushering in a wave of Japanese ghost film remakes. The dark, brooding Japanese horror style made its way into Hollywood films like Andrew Douglas's 2005 remake of the Amityville Horror.
AKA a cash grab fad of ghost films that were doubly offensive as remakes, the vast majority of which were critically and commercially unsuccessful. And did this guy actually just name drop the awful Amityville Horror remake? No mention of the others or the original. Also see the good Amityville Horror, No House on Haunted Hill, or 13 Ghosts, huh? Huh. Then again, thank God they didn't talk about the Blair Witch Project or Paraboredom Activity. Good trade-off, I guess.
And now for my final thought.
It's really easy to poke fun at the establishment over how out of touch it is, but what I find sadder is how attention-seeking horror industry insiders are for their validation. Because believe me, they desperately want in on the upper echelon's inner circle. This series of episodes exposes just how needy these directors are for their approval.
Supernatural thriller. That was what they called The Sixth Sense. And there were orders not to call it a horror film. One of the scariest, most brilliant films ever made. And they said, don't call it a horror movie. It was like horror was a dirty word.
I understand full stock the frustration that comes with lack of recognition for your achievements. But there comes a time when you should desire to reach that high bar on your own terms and by your own rules. This documentary as a whole was littered with half-truths, spin cycles, false facts, and fake news, or what I affectionately refer to as litany inconsistency. Suffice it to say, one solid episode out of 6 isn't any good kind of batting average, especially when weighed down with such shameless kissing up or politics. I've done my best to make this as entertaining for you as possible, and I do hope you enjoy this 6-night event on my channel. Just know 2 things. There's more to come from this channel throughout the month, and Eli Roth Visionary doesn't quite have the ring to it that AMC thinks it does.